Yes, I'm Joe Ikley, Extension Weed Specialist, based here in campus in Fargo. So short amount of time today, so I'm going to cover just uh, a couple updates here for sunflower weed control. Really just given the time, really going to cover about two different topics here. So I wanted to kind of delve into some of the sunflower survey results this year, kind of compared to past years, and maybe some of the trends we're looking at. And then going to share a little bit of got water hemp and palmer amaranth research I'm going to share, but it's really can be extrapolated out to any ALS or group 2 resistant pigweed with regards to sunflower or control of those pigweeds in sunflower. So first of all, focusing on some of the weed data from the surveys. After the 2017 survey, Dr. Kirk Howlett did a pretty good job summarizing really the previous 5 or so years of what we were seeing as far as weed escapes in these sunflower surveys. And this slide here is really focused on North Dakota, Minnesota, and percent incidence of finding different weeds in the fields. And so a couple things I like to point out here, the far left column would be kochia. Just annually, one of our top weeds that we find in sunflower, a big spike there in 2017. Of course, a drought year, and kochia, as we all were maybe refamiliarized with this past year, definitely going to thrive in drought conditions. Other weeds that are pretty just persistent that we find year in, year out, Canada thistle, maybe a bit of a decline there as we got to 2017. And then redroot pigweed, historically probably our most problematic pigweed in the state, until we've started getting infestations of water hemp, certainly here in the past couple of years. Just to put this into context about what we're dealing with compared to sunflower growers in the more southern Great Plains regions, some of the data from Kansas, for instance, basically shows that a different pigweed, palmer amaranth, is really their top weed of concern year in and year out. They, of course, are battling kochia down there as well. Then puncture vine is a weed we don't deal with, but volunteer grain, we certainly can deal with volunteer grain on an annual basis up here as well. Just another southern state for context. Again, Texas now, palmer amaranth is their top pigweed. So certainly, if I look at sunflowers kind of up and down the plains, pigweeds will certainly be continue to be of concern moving forward. Just some quick notes that I pulled out from the latest set of data. 2021 in Kansas was about 100% of the fields they found palmer, and then the Texas about 75%. So continues to be their most problematic weed in those two southern states. If I look at kind of, again, Dr. Howlett's summarization of through the 2017 survey data, the pervasive weeds that we're going to be dealing with in the different regions, if you kind of split it into the Dakotas and Minnesota, kochia, redroot pigweed, and Canada thistle are certainly ones we deal with on an annual basis. And then southern area, again, kochia, palmer, and then in some cases redroot pigweed, but they're really primarily dealing with palmer down in the south. Okay, compare all that to the 2021 data. And so this is compiled across all the states, all the data points. So showing the percent incidence of the top 8 or so weeds here from the latest survey, and kind of nationwide in the survey, kochia still number 1. But then we have a kind of a new player to the game, tumble pigweed. It's a pigweed we don't really talk enough about because it's really just kind of there in existence in several fields, and certainly in the western part of the Dakotas. We can find it on an annual basis, but in 2021, just kind of statewide drought, I think it was pretty surprising to many of us to find how widespread tumble pigweed actually was, certainly compared to our average year. Green foxtail has certainly made the list, and we did not report this in any of those kind of top weeds going back to that 2017 data. So green foxtail, of course, becoming more problematic in many crops and certainly in sunflower as well. So a little bit of additional context here. Again, this is the nationwide reports. So I went into the spreadsheet and pulled out just within North Dakota. In case you were wondering why, kochia at 15% seemed a little low. Well, if you're in North Dakota, it was a little low. So 60% of fields this past year in North Dakota specifically, we could find kochia. Tumble pigweed up just a little bit compared to the national numbers, so 17%. Green foxtail, certainly much bigger or much larger percent incidence than kind of that whole Great Plains type survey. And that's really because green foxtail is really a North Dakota, South Dakota type problem. Once you get south from here, it's really kind of more of a roadside weed and not all that problematic in many of our row crops. And then red root pigweed up to 23%, again, specifying North Dakota. So certainly more pigweed escapes that we had up here compared to kind of the national compilation from the 2021 survey. So one thing I wanted to briefly touch on before I just kind of shift gears to talk about the pigweeds for the rest of the time is looking at the green foxtail specifically. So Brian Jenks up at the Minot or the North Central REC has been conducting resistance testing for the past 5 or 6 years now on both wild oats and green foxtail. This is pretty much a summary of his latest results for green foxtail, and some context for this slide is that many of these products are the group 1 and group 2 herbicides that we'll use in small grains for control of these grass weeds. So very problematic in small grains specifically because we just have fewer products, a little bit more difficult to control. I really want to focus on the bottom 3 products here with regards to sunflowers. And so a couple of things that I kind of pick out from the survey results. And again, I should point out this is targeted escape plants. So go to a field towards the end of the year. There's green foxtail escapes. They're sent in for testing. So this is not a random survey of all green foxtail across the state, but certainly the problematic fields and seeing if we have resistance. So if we look at the 3 products that we could use in sunflower post-emergence for some grass control, the one giving us most issue or the most populations with resistance that we're finding would be Assure 2. So the 2020 survey, basically 60% of tested populations had resistance to Assure. Prior to that, basically 41% of over a 4-year data set had resistance to Assure 2. So to that chemistry, we are getting more resistance. But if you look at Select, which have a number of different generics, clethodim is the active ingredient, a few populations, but not nearly as high as the Assure chemistry. And then for group 2 herbicides, Raptor, same product as Beyond. So if you have Clearfield sunflowers, we have not found, at least through the 2020 screening, it did not find any resistance to that chemical. So still some options that we have for sunflower for control of green foxtail, but looks like Assure 2, we certainly have a lot more resistance out there in the landscape. So just kind of some data to share there about maybe targeting which products we may be able to get better utility on green foxtail for our sunflower acres. Okay, so I want to shift gears and share some research, basically from pre-emergence and pre-plant incorporated types of programs. So we give a lot of lip service to Palmer amaranth and water hemp, very problematic, certainly on the national scale, and definitely in corn soybean production. Maybe not so much in sunflower, but really just based on where a lot of our sunflower acres are located compared to where Palmer and water hemp are located. But I want to share a couple pictures from Cass County this past summer. So anytime a weed scientist is driving by a field and sees something like this, you kind of have to stop and take pictures. So we did have a couple fields on the survey that had water hemp as a weed escape in sunflower. But this particular field was basically this type of water hemp pressure across the whole field. And so just as we are getting more kind of widespread water hemp populations established, we're going to start overlapping some more on sunflower acres. And so certainly we need to make sure we have good programs for control of water hemp, but also anything that will control water hemp in sunflowers is also going to do relatively well, very well on our other pigweeds, such as tumble pigweed and such as redroot pigweed. So real quick, just a couple of maps here before we get into some data. So as far as where water hemp is located in North Dakota, the green counties, we have found at least one population of water hemp. I'll still kind of draw a circle around the southeast corner. So these are really the counties that are dealing with water hemp on an annual basis on a large number of fields. As we get further north into the valley and then certainly further west, we're starting to find more water hemp populations. But as far as kind of a driver weed, it's still really kind of this southeast corner where we're really dealing with water hemp as a major problem. And then because I'm going to share some data, did want to show where we have Palmer amaranth located across the state. So we have 14 different counties where we have detected Palmer. And I will say that most of these counties, it's basically located or confined to one operation currently for the most part. So just because a county is lit up doesn't mean that there's widespread Palmer. Doesn't even really mean we have to start programming for Palmer control in sunflowers, but we certainly have presence in these counties. And if the populations aren't stamped out, then it could become a problem in the future. And again, putting this into further context, just showing that Kansas and Texas data, where Palmer is really their top weed they're dealing with in sunflowers. So really another reason to try and stay on top of keeping Palmer out, so we're not dealing with it on an annual basis in sunflowers up here. So basically taking a bunch of different products out of the weed guide, I've really popped into one slide some of the best products for management of, and I'm just going to call it ALS or group 2 resistant pigweed in general. So water hemp and Palmer amaranth, they're basically guaranteed to be resistant to group 2 herbicides. So for our purposes, beyond won't work in sunflowers. We do have populations of both Powell amaranth and redroot pigweed in various locations across the state that also have this group 2 resistance. So again, beyond just is not performing, giving us that post-emergence control that we could once experience. And so that really drives us into the pre-emergence, pre-plant incorporated type of programs to get good pigweed control when we have resistance. And again, across a number of different pigweeds, and I probably should throw tumble pigweed in there as well. So as far as what we can use, if I'm going to separate out the effectiveness of our pre-emergence or pre-plant incorporated herbicides, sulfentrazone and pyroxasulfone, so Spartan and Zidua would be our best products for pigweed control. And they're available as a premix. Authority Supreme, Authority Edge is an example of a premix that has both of those two active ingredients in it. We can get certainly some good residual out of metolachlor, which is the dual and all the generics. And then anything yellow, if you want to incorporate, or if you use Prowl pre-emergence, we'll also get some pretty decent control of the pigweeds out of those products as well. Just not quite as good year in and year out as those top two on the line, on the top line. Now, as far as post-emergence products, like I mentioned, with resistance, that we don't have anything foliar that's going to work well for us if we have those ALS resistant, group 2 resistant pigweeds. So really the only chemistry we could try to use, we can use Zidua post-emergence in sunflowers between V1 and V8. But again, this will not control any weeds that are out of the ground. So this is really kind of a layered residual approach to try and get additional residual to get that sunflower canopy developed. So this would probably be a program we'd only want to spend money on a field like the one in the bottom part of the slide here. When you have pressure like that, you're going to want to try a program with overlapping residuals. But for the most part, we're pretty much going to rely on incorporated and pre-emergence products for the whole on our sunflower acres. So want to share some of this data that I talked about earlier or alluded to earlier. One caveat I'll point out, the research I'm going to show was conducted on dry bean, but most of the treatments are certainly applicable to sunflower as far as control for the pigweeds. But in this first trial, water hemp trial is established in Fargo, so on a nice Fargo clay, planted May 10th. So we had pre-plant incorporated herbicides. Incorporation depth was 4 inches. And then we sprayed our pre-emergence herbicides. Fargo location was pretty dry over the first month of the experiment. About a 1/4 inch of rain 10 days after establishment and planting. Our first 1 inch rainfall came June 7th and 8th, so about 4 weeks after planting. As far as the treatments I'm going to show here, the pre-plant incorporated treatments, so we have all of our different yellow options. Eptam 4 pints is in red because we can't use 4 pints in sunflowers. We're capped at 3.5 pints. So just keep that in mind that Eptam will have a little bit higher rate than we can use standalone when I show that data. A couple combinations of Eptam plus Sonlan or Treflan, and then the different Spartan products that we can use. Again, this was targeted for dry beans, so I don't have Authority Supreme or Authority Edge in this treatment list. Pre-emergence herbicides. So what we can use in sunflowers that we're using this trial. So 2 pints of dual magnum was one of the treatments, and those same Spartan products and Spartan combinations that we used incorporated. The one change here, we did have Outlook pre-emergence, so again, focus on dry beans. If this was sunflowers, we would have had Prowl pre-emergence here, since we cannot use Outlook in sunflowers. So sharing this data quickly here on the water hemp. To set up the slide here, because the next several slides will all be set up exactly the same. So in this case, water hemp control is our y-axis. This gold bar in the middle, simply separating the pre-plant incorporated treatments on the left from the pre-emergence herbicide treatments on the right. And so this case, we have water hemp control 4 weeks after planting. So basically right around that time, that first 1-inch rainfall. And basically every program that we use, we got at least 90% control of water hemp 4 weeks after planting. The best products would be all the ones with an A above the bar. And so basically the Eptam, again, at that rate, more for dry beans and sunflowers. Then Sonlan, Treflan all performed best compared to Prowl. And then we had different combinations all performed well there too. Going out to 8 weeks after planting. Now in this case, same setup, but now we did start to see a drop off, particularly in the pre-emergence herbicides. Again, very dry conditions this past year, so the incorporated herbicides did perform better. But really the best product that we saw for water hemp control was that combination of Eptam and Treflan. Spartan Elite Incorporated did quite well. If I look at the pre-emergence products, Dual by itself and that Spartan plus Outlook would have been the best performing pre-emergence herbicides. So since Greg popped on, that means I've got about a minute left. So I'm just going to go ahead and skip past the Palmer data. In general, trended very similarly to the water hemp data, but just less control on Palmer, and that's probably more due to the site. Different site planted a couple weeks later than what we had in Fargo. So kind of my conclusions on pigweeds, and this again is ALS resistant pigweed control in general. And sunflower, in the dry conditions we experienced, the incorporated products were better. Treflan, just if you do have Palmer, we found Treflan was better on water hemp than it was on Palmer. So Treflan was actually the weakest group 3 or yellow product that we used in the Palmer research. Again, because it was a dry bean trial, we did not have Zidua or pyroxasulfone, but compared to Dual, certainly pyroxasulfone or Zidua will be a better pigweed product, but you do need about a 1/2 inch of rain to get that product to be fully activated. Again, the importance here with that type of resistance profile that we have on at least 4 pigweeds in the state, beyond won't work, nothing else will work post-emergence, so we're relying on the incorporated or pre-emergence applications. So I'll go ahead and stop there. Contact info on the slide. If you like the electronic version of the weed guide, that QR code will bring you straight to the website and the full PDF version.